On November 28, 2025, China issued a strong call to the United States to lift its sanctions on Venezuela, labeling them as illegal and unilateral. This statement was made by Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning during a regular press conference in Beijing. The call for the removal of sanctions is the latest development in a long-standing diplomatic disagreement between the US and China over the situation in Venezuela. The US has imposed a series of sanctions on Venezuela over the past several years, primarily in response to the Venezuelan government's alleged human rights violations, erosion of democracy, and connections to illegal activities, including drug trafficking. These sanctions have had a significant impact on the Venezuelan economy, contributing to the country's ongoing financial difficulties and political instability. The Venezuelan government, under President Nicolás Maduro, has consistently rejected these sanctions, arguing that they infringe on Venezuela's sovereignty and violate international law. In her statement, Mao Ning emphasized that China has always opposed sanctions that do not have a solid basis in international law. She stated, "China has always opposed unilateral sanctions that have no basis in international law and are not authorized by the United Nations Security Council." This direct criticism highlights China's long-standing opposition to the imposition of unilateral sanctions, particularly when these measures are not approved by the United Nations or other international bodies. China's position has been consistent in arguing that sanctions imposed by one country or a group of countries without international consensus are illegitimate and harmful to the targeted nation and its people. Mao's remarks also made it clear that China opposes foreign interference in Venezuela's internal affairs. She noted, "China opposes external forces interfering in Venezuela's internal affairs under any pretext." This reinforces China's stance on respecting national sovereignty and non-interference in the domestic matters of other nations. For China, the principle of non-interference is fundamental to its foreign policy, and it has consistently applied this principle to criticize actions by the US and its allies that they view as violating this principle. The Venezuelan government has long sought to align itself with countries that oppose US policies, and China has become one of its strongest supporters. Venezuela and China have deepened their bilateral ties over the years, especially in the areas of trade, energy, and infrastructure development. China has also provided loans to Venezuela to help stabilize its economy, and both nations have coordinated their efforts in resisting US influence in the region. In contrast, the United States maintains that the Venezuelan government, led by President Nicolás Maduro, has become a pariah in the international community due to its crackdowns on political opposition, restrictions on press freedom, and accusations of corruption. The US government has consistently argued that the sanctions are necessary to pressure the Maduro regime into respecting human rights and restoring democracy. Washington has also expressed concerns about Venezuela's role in facilitating illicit activities, including its alleged connections to criminal organizations such as drug cartels and terrorist groups. The economic impact of US sanctions on Venezuela has been profound. Venezuela, once one of the wealthiest nations in Latin America due to its vast oil reserves, has faced a dramatic economic decline in recent years. The country's oil industry has been severely affected by US sanctions, leading to a sharp drop in oil production and exports. This, in turn, has contributed to Venezuela's ongoing economic crisis, characterized by hyperinflation, unemployment, and widespread poverty. The sanctions have also disrupted Venezuela's ability to engage in international trade, with many countries and companies reluctant to do business with Venezuela due to the risk of US penalties. Despite these challenges, the Venezuelan government has managed to maintain its hold on power, partly due to the support of China and other allies, such as Russia. China, in particular, has been vocal in its support for Venezuela, condemning US sanctions and calling for their removal on multiple occasions. Chinese officials have repeatedly argued that the US sanctions are counterproductive and have only worsened the humanitarian situation in Venezuela. They have also emphasized that Venezuela should be allowed to resolve its issues without outside interference. In her press conference, Mao Ning reiterated China's call for a peaceful and stable environment in Latin America and the Caribbean, specifically highlighting the need for international cooperation to promote development in the region. She urged the US to focus on facilitating peace, stability, and development, rather than maintaining sanctions that contribute to Venezuela's hardships. China urges the United States to lift its illegal and unilateral sanctions on Venezuela and do more to facilitate peace, stability, and development in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mao said, framing the sanctions as an obstacle to regional cooperation and growth. The issue of sanctions on Venezuela is a microcosm of broader geopolitical tensions between China and the United States. Over the past few years, the US and China have clashed on a wide range of issues, including trade, technology, human rights, and security. Venezuela, as one of the few countries in the Americas that has sought closer ties with China, has become a focal point in this broader conflict. The US has consistently criticized China's growing influence in Latin America, while China has accused the US of attempting to dominate the region and undermine the sovereignty of countries like Venezuela. For China, the situation in Venezuela is part of a larger effort to expand its influence in Latin America and the Caribbean. China has made significant investments in the region over the past decade, providing loans and financial assistance to countries in need of economic support. These investments, often framed as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, have helped strengthen China's ties with various Latin American nations, many of which are increasingly looking for alternatives to US-centric economic policies. While the US continues to push for a change in Venezuela's leadership, China has consistently backed Maduro's government, viewing it as a partner in its broader geopolitical strategy. This has led to a sharp divide between the two global powers, with the US attempting to isolate Venezuela through sanctions and diplomatic pressure, while China works to expand its influence by offering support and alternatives to US policies. The US and China are also at odds over the broader issue of sanctions, with the US maintaining that its sanctions are necessary to combat human rights violations and support democratic movements, while China argues that unilateral sanctions are illegal and ineffective. This ideological divide has only deepened over time, as both countries continue to pursue their respective agendas in the global arena. As of now, there seems to be little hope for an immediate resolution to the issue of US sanctions on Venezuela. The Maduro government remains in power, with no sign of significant political change on the horizon, and the US has shown no intention of lifting its sanctions until Venezuela undergoes significant political reforms. On the other hand, China remains steadfast in its support for Venezuela, continuing to advocate for the removal of sanctions and opposing any outside interference in the country's internal affairs. In summary, China's call for the US to lift its sanctions on Venezuela reflects the ongoing diplomatic tensions between the two countries. China continues to oppose what it views as illegal and unilateral sanctions, while the US maintains that such measures are necessary to pressure the Venezuelan government to address human rights violations and democratic deficits. The situation remains a focal point in the broader geopolitical struggle between the US and China, with Venezuela at the center of this ongoing conflict. As tensions continue to rise between the US and China over Venezuela, the international community remains divided on the effectiveness and legality of sanctions. While China insists that the US should respect Venezuela's sovereignty and lift its sanctions, the US stands firm in its position that such measures are essential for addressing human rights abuses and the erosion of democracy in the country. With both sides deeply entrenched in their views, the future of Venezuela's political and economic recovery remains uncertain, while the broader geopolitical rivalry between China and the US continues to shape the dynamics of the region.